In this video, we're going to continue where we left off last video, which was all about coumarin. And at the end of the last video, I said I was going to go and make some blends with coumarin. That's what I'm going to cover in this video. And what I'm going to do is make a Mexican vanilla accord and a Storax accord. So if you're interested to know how to make these accords, then stick around for the video and enjoy. So the story began when I was doing the research for the last video about coumarin, and when doing the research I actually found a really interesting article by the BBC which was about how coumarin used to be used a lot in food. It used to be used as kind of an adulterant for vanilla flavouring. Actually, a lot of chefs quite liked to use it because they thought it gave this nice touch to the vanilla flavouring. Anyway, that was all made illegal in the USA in 1954, and that is because it's actually toxic to eat a lot of coumarin. So they were basically trying to get it out of the food. Anyway, back when I was doing the evaluations for the coumarin in the first video, what I really noticed was the kind of almond gourmand aspect to the coumarin. It really made me think of like almond pastries, almond croissants, that kind of thing. And because of that whole kind of bakery-like aspect, vanilla is also something that's used a lot in those kind of things, those kind of sweet foods. So it made me think straight back to this Mexican vanilla concept, and I really thought, hey, I think I should mix some vanilla with the coumarin and see what it smells like. Now, the most common aroma chemical that's used for a vanilla scent, and it's also extremely cheap to use, really widely used in perfumery, is called vanillin. So I thought straight away, how about I try to do a binary combination between coumarin and vanillin and see what it smells like. In order to do this, I thought this would be the perfect time to try out the Jean Carl's method, which is a really famous method for beginner perfumers to start to kind of go about perfumery in a methodical way. Now, the Jean Carl's method is outlined in a document that he wrote, so I'll find a link for you and I'll put that in the description if you want to read the whole thing. It's a lot more than I could explain quickly just in the context of this video, but the main thing about it is the way he starts off describing the method is in order to make an accord, say for a bass note, what you would do is you would find one bass note which you want to base your accord around, and then you would pick something else which you think is going to go well with that. And then you take those two raw materials and you start making different blends of those two raw materials, but at different ratios. And then by doing that, you can work out which ratio of those materials smells best kind of for that combination. And that is the basis of the accord that you make. So in this case, this is what I'm going to do with coumarin and vanillin. I'm going to make a binary combination or a binary accord with just these two components, and I'm going to try them at different ratios. Now in this case, when I smelled these both next to each other, just on the scent strips at 1%, what I felt straight away was that the coumarin was a bit more overpowering. And also because I know that coumarin, you can't use that much of it in your perfume if you want to stick to the IFRA limits, I thought it's probably going to be best to try to make an accord here that's dominant with vanillin. So what I did was I made 3 different variations. Firstly, I made a variation where it was 1:1 vanillin to coumarin at 1%. Secondly, still at 1%, I made a variation where it was 1 part coumarin to 3 parts vanillin. And then finally, I did a variation where it was 1 part coumarin to 5 parts vanillin. So all that we're trying to do here is find that ratio at which these two aroma chemicals blend really well and smell quite harmonious together. Right, so now I've got to make those, let's go and actually see what they smell like. So I'm going to start off with the 1:1, or the MV1A, as I've called it. That's just how I've named the trial. Now, to me, in this one, I do definitely think that the coumarin does dominate a little bit, and I definitely get much more of that almond scent. I don't really feel the vanilla coming through quite so much. Secondly, we're going to go with the 1 part coumarin to 3 parts vanilla and see what that smells like. Now, in this case, the balance is definitely a lot better. I think this one definitely feels a lot more like something's really going on there, and at this stage I really quite like how this is. I think I could definitely actually go and use this as the accord if I wanted to. It does have that nice balance. You can definitely smell the vanilla there quite a lot, but you can also smell the coumarin, and I actually think it melds itself kind of into something different. It kind of has this depth of it that neither of the two things have themselves, and that's definitely a good sign that you've got a good accord on your hands. Finally, we've got the other version, the C version, which is 5 parts vanillin to 1 part coumarin. Now again, this one I think is quite good. This one is actually quite similar to the B version in how it smells, so you can definitely smell that the vanilla comes out just a little bit more in this version. Now, I like both the B and the C version quite a lot. What I'm more talking about here though is which one do I kind of want to pin down as a base. So when I say a base, I mean which one do I want to write down as an exact formula that next time I reach for that Mexican vanilla smell, which bottle with the exact proportions already in it am I going to pick out. And for now that's going to be the 1C. However, I'm going to take all of these trial blends, I'm going to put my notes about them in my app formula so I can remember what they smell like, and I will note down in there that kind of both either the C or the B version, either of them would work quite well, and that anywhere I would say in that kind of range, having that ratio would be appropriate. So depending on what kind of perfume I wanted to make, depending, say I was doing more of a fougere where the coumarin was going to be more pronounced, maybe I want to use kind of the B version of the accord if I'm going for that vanilla aspect of it as well. So all of this gives me kind of intel for the future of what kind of ratios I might want to be using between these two raw materials. Okay, so that's the Mexican vanilla accord. Really basic, really minimalistic, only two things. However, I really do like it and I think it's a great accord, so I would recommend you try it in your own perfumes if you want to. Anyway, the next accord we're going to look at is the Storax accord. So once I'd made the Mexican vanilla accord, I was smelling this, and for some reason, what it really reminded me of was this Storax incense, which I've kind of been obsessed with trying to recreate the smell of for a while, though it's something that I don't think about a lot, I just kind of revisit the idea every now and again. I never really smelt something that I'd made in Perfumery that really reminded me of that incense quite so heavily. What I did think, however, was it's definitely going to need a touch of cinnamon to get there. So what I did was I went through my aroma chemicals, looked through my library, and I found one thing which I had called cinnamol alcohol. What I did was I put the cinnamol alcohol on the scent strip along with a scent strip of vanillin and a scent strip of coumarin, and I put them all together. And this is a technique you can do, by the way, to test in advance if your accords might work out. And then I just held them together and smelled them. And lo and behold, this thing smelled really quite similar to that Storax I was looking for, which was really cool. Anyway, despite the naming being really confusing for Storax, I did look at this in the other video I did on the topic where I actually got some liquid amber orientalis, which is one thing that's called Storax. So if you're interested in that, check out that video, I'll put a link in the description. But yeah, despite the naming being really confusing for Storax, I did a quick search online and I actually found, to my surprise, that cinnamol alcohol, the thing I just found, was actually apparently present in Storax as well. So this made me think, okay, I'm definitely onto something here. So the next step, of course, was to actually go and do the blend and make it into an actual accord. Similarly to the coumarin, the cinnamol alcohol actually did seem quite strong when I had it on the scent strip in the combination. So when I went to make my first blend, what I made sure to do was make sure it wasn't too strong. Knowing that the coumarin was stronger last time, and knowing that I'd had that at a certain ratio to the vanillin, what I decided to do was have the same ratio now of the cinnamol alcohol that I was also adding to the vanillin. I also, however, wanted to keep the ratio in the Mexican vanilla component of the accord the same. So what I did was I played with the numbers a bit until I found a ratio where the vanillin and the coumarin were exactly the same concentrations and ratios to each other as they were in the Mexican vanilla accord, but now we also had this cinnamol alcohol on top of it at the same percentage in an absolute sense as the coumarin. Right, so I've got here that first iteration of the Storax accord. Now, when I smelled it, the one thing I immediately noticed was actually it smelled quite like the Mexican vanilla. I really didn't get the cinnamon note coming through. It didn't smell as much like it did on the scent strips, so what it basically signaled to me was the cinnamol alcohol was just too weak. So I went and marked that as too weak, and then I created a new formula where I just duplicated that, and this time I tried to keep everything roughly the same, except for this time I just wanted to have a much greater percentage of the cinnamol alcohol. In the end, what I did for that second iteration was I doubled the ratio of cinnamol alcohol to everything else. Then another thing I also noticed about the original iteration was it wasn't quite as strong as a whole as I would have liked it to have been. So what I also did was I brought the absolute percentage of the total formula up from 1.18% all the way up to 2%, just to make everything a little bit stronger, while otherwise keeping the ratios which I'd already set into place. Anyway, so let's smell this iteration. So I can immediately smell the cinnamon element much stronger in this, and it's definitely a lot better than the last one. Now the only one thing I would note about this is maybe now the vanillin is actually a little bit too strong. If I look at it, it's actually sitting now at 1.25% in the total formula, and in a real perfume, this would actually be, I think, quite a lot of vanillin to have, so probably a bit of an overdose at this point. For now, I'm going to leave the Accord here because it pretty much does the job, and if you want to go and make this at home, you'll definitely get the idea for the Accord and what it's meant to smell like. That said, I may go and do a few more iterations in my own time just to tweak things a little bit. Maybe, for example, I will lower the vanillin and work out if I'm happy with it over the long term after I smelled it for a few days. Because sometimes after a few days you realize something that you didn't quite realize before, and you realize a few more tweaks that you might need to make. Anyway, for now, I think this is a perfectly good version of the Storax Accord. If you've been looking for a Storax Accord yourself, I would actually really recommend you try this and use this as a base for something to tweak off. Really nice Accord. Definitely, I think it would go well in some kind of Christmas fragrances or some incense fragrances, something like that. Really happy with this actually, just because it's something I kind of was looking for a long time, and I completely found it out of the blue. Actually, this is one of my favorite parts about Perfumery. It's when you kind of are looking for something and you can't quite find it, and eventually the kind of pieces of the puzzle all fall together and you start noticing uses for materials that you never would have seen a use for before. For example, with respect to the cinnamon alcohol, when I first started Perfumery and when I first met that raw material, because it had cinnamon in the name, I instantly thought, this must be used for cinnamon accords. When I went and smelled it, however, it smelled half kind of like cinnamon, which I thought, okay, that's nice, but the other half of it smells quite phenolic, a bit like phenylethyl alcohol if you smelled that. And for that reason, I found it very hard to actually use it or place it, because if I tried to make an accord centered around the cinnamon alcohol, it would just smell kind of like phenolic, and that's not really something that you necessarily want. Now, after using it successfully in the Storax Accord, and also reading online that it's used a lot in floral accords, in fact, which actually does make sense given that phenolic smell. Other phenolic things are also used in floral accords. Now, knowing that, it gives me a completely different perspective on the raw material, which is great, and it just kind of goes to show how when you get more advanced at Perfumery, you get to kind of see beyond the face value of materials and stop looking at materials just in terms of, oh, that smells quite nice, that smells quite nice, that doesn't smell so nice to me, and you kind of can get more insights a bit more organically and naturally into, okay, this thing maybe on its own, it doesn't smell that nice, but actually, I can see how in the context of this accord, in that accord, it may actually be vital to make the accord work. The other major lesson from this is, once again, like I always say, how important it is to learn your raw materials. And the reason for that is, in this context, that cinnamon alcohol, the reason that that kind of popped to my head was partially because when I'd smelled that Mexican vanilla, I already kind of thought, oh, I needed something cinnamon, and then I thought of the cinnamon alcohol, and then I kind of already knew, that might actually work really well in this context. If I hadn't gone and actually smelled the cinnamon alcohol enough in the past to go and know what it smells like, then that probably wouldn't have come through into my head just at the right moment when I was thinking about it, and that might have meant that I didn't actually end up making the accord at all if I hadn't have thought of it. The only reason that I even thought of the cinnamon alcohol in the first place is because I'd already learned about it in the past, I'd already made my notes on it, and I knew enough in my head what it smelled like for it to come right to the forefront when I was in that context, when suddenly I realized that I was missing something and my brain somehow, I guess subconsciously, worked out that that was the right thing to fill in the gap. Anyway, that's it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Do let me know, firstly, if you get the chance to try out these accords for yourself, what you thought of them. And also, if you get the chance to try them out and you actually manage to iterate them any further, let me know what you tried and what you thought of that, because I'll be really interested to find out and hear what other direction you could go with these accords. Apart from that, feel free to leave suggestions for future videos down in the comments. I can't promise that I will do it, but I do read them all and I definitely do take them all into consideration when making videos in the future. Also, if you haven't yet checked out Formula, my Perfumery app, definitely go and check that out. I'll leave a link in the description below. It's how I do all of my formulas now for Perfumery, how I track all of my raw materials to keep track of the notes about them and learn them properly, but also how I go and write down all my trial blends and keep them organized and quickly write and iterate formulas without having to kind of rewrite them out manually in some long form way each time. I've got nothing more to say, so until next time, enjoy your Perfumery and I'll see you in the next video.